If this video showed up for you, it's because this story is going to move you and give you chills. So go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of story, and comment which city you're watching from. The auction hall smelled of old wood and dust, suspended in shafts of pale afternoon light. Shadow lay on the cold concrete floor, his dark coat matted in places where surgery scars still showed pink beneath the fur. His left hip ached with the memory of the bullet that had ended his career, the one that saved Officer Daniel Rodriguez's life 3 years ago. Now, at 8 years old, Shadow was just another lot number in a police surplus auction, surrounded by retired vehicles and outdated equipment. The German shepherd's ears twitched at every voice, searching for one that might recognize him. But the crowd moved past with barely a glance. He was too old, too damaged, too expensive to maintain. The auctioneer's voice droned on about his service record: 157 arrests, 12 drug busts, 1 officer saved. But the numbers meant nothing to people looking for guard dogs or family pets. Shadow had spent his whole life serving, training at 6 months old, graduating top of his K-9 class, 5 years patrolling the city's most dangerous neighborhoods with Daniel, his handler and best friend. They'd been inseparable. Daniel would slip him extra treats when the sergeant wasn't looking. They trained together, slept in the same room, relied on each other when situations turned deadly. Then came that February night. The warehouse had been dark, filled with the chemical smell of methamphetamine and the nervous energy of cornered criminals. Shadow had detected them first, alerting Daniel with a low growl, but they'd been outnumbered. When the gunfire erupted, Shadow hadn't hesitated. He'd launched himself at the man aiming at Daniel's back, taking the bullet meant for his partner. The surgery saved Shadow's life, but it ended his career. Hip dysplasia set in around the old wound. He couldn't run the way he used to, couldn't pass the physical standards required for active duty. The department had rules about retired canines. They were supposed to go home with their handlers. But Daniel had gotten married, moved to a smaller apartment. His new wife was allergic to dogs. Shadow never understood why Daniel stopped visiting. "Lot 47, the auctioneer announced, his voice echoing off the metal rafters. 8-year-old German shepherd, retired police canine. Starting bed, $500. Silence filled the hall like a held breath. Shadow lifted his head, dark eyes scanning the crowd with the intelligence that had made him such an effective officer. He recognized the way people looked away, the way they whispered about vet bills and behavioral issues. To them, he was just an old, broken dog. 400? The auctioneer tried, his enthusiasm fading. 300 for a trained police dog? More silence. Someone coughed in the back. A child whined about being bored. Shadow's tail hadn't wagged in months. He learned that hope was painful, that loyalty wasn't always rewarded, that the world moved on without asking if you were ready. He laid his head back down on his paws, the fight gone from his eyes. Perhaps it would be better this way. Perhaps he'd given everything he had already. But someone in the back of the room was watching. Adam Mitchell stood apart from the crowd, lean and weathered in a way that spoke of hard years and harder choices. His graying beard was neatly trimmed, what his flannel shirt had seen too many washings. His hands, calloused and scarred, hung loosely at his sides. But his eyes, pale blue and distant, were fixed on the dog nobody wanted. Adam understood what it meant to be used up and cast aside. He'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan as an army combat medic, seen things that carved grooves in a man's soul. He'd come home to a wife who'd moved on, a job market that didn't know what to do with his skills, and nightmares that woke him gasping at 3 a.m. The VA had tried therapy, medication, support groups, but healing wasn't something you could schedule between appointments. 2 years ago, Adam had inherited his grandfather's cabin in the mountains, 40 miles from the nearest town. He'd sold everything else and disappeared into the woods, seeking the kind of peace that only silence and solitude could offer. He'd learned to live small, to need less, to fill his days with chopping wood and fishing and watching the seasons change through his window. But loneliness was still loneliness, even when you chose it. "Going once," the auctioneer said, already moving on in his mind. "Going twice." 300, Adam's voice cut through the hall, quiet but firm. Heads turned. The auctioneer blinked in surprise. "We have 300. Do I hear 350? The silence returned, but this time it felt different, expectant. "Sold to bidder 71 for $300. Adam walked forward through the parting crowd, his boots echoing on the concrete. Shadow watched him approach, something flickering in those intelligent eyes. Not hope, exactly, but perhaps the distant memory of what hope used to feel like. Adam knelt down slowly, his own old injuries making the movement careful. He didn't reach out immediately, didn't make assumptions about touch or trust. He just looked at Shadow the way one survivor recognizes another. "Hey, buddy, looks like we're both too broken for anyone else to want." Shadow's ear twitched. "I've got a cabin up in the mountains. It's quiet, peaceful. There's a stream nearby, and in the evenings you can watch the deer come down to drink." Adam's voice carried the weight of loneliness, finally finding words. "I can't promise I'll be good at this. I've never had a dog before. But I can promise you'll never just be a number again." Something in Adam's eyes, some shared understanding of pain and abandonment, made Shadow lift his head fully for the first time that day. Adam extended his hand slowly, palm down, letting Shadow make the choice. For a long moment, the old K-9 just stared at this stranger who saw him more than his scars. Then, with a hesitancy that spoke of too many disappointments, Shadow leaned forward and touched his nose to Adam's knuckles. It was the smallest gesture, barely a connection, but it was a beginning. The truck ride up the mountain took 2 hours, winding through pine forests that grew denser with each mile. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, his body tense, eyes fixed on the road ahead. He'd been transported before, to training facilities, to crime scenes, to the veterinary hospital where they'd pieced him back together. But those trips always had Daniel's familiar scent, his reassuring voice. This was different. This was the unknown. Adam drove in silence, respecting the space between them. He'd stopped at a feed store on the way out of town, buying dog food, bowls, a thick bed, and a heavy-duty leash. The cashier had made small talk about getting a new dog, but Adam had just nodded politely and paid cash. He wasn't ready to explain that he wasn't rescuing Shadow so much as they were rescuing each other. The cabin appeared as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. It was modest, a single-story structure with a covered porch, surrounded by towering pines and the kind of quiet that felt like a physical presence. Smoke curled from the stone chimney. A well-worn path led down to the stream Adam had mentioned, its constant murmur audible even from the truck. Adam killed the engine, and the silence settled around them like a blanket. "This is home," he said simply. Shadow's nose worked overtime, processing 1,000 new scents: pine sap, wood smoke, wildflowers, deer musk, the mineral smell of mountain water. No exhaust fumes, no sirens, no crowds. His ears swiveled, tracking sounds he'd never encountered in the city. birds calling their evening songs, wind moving through branches, something small rustling in the underbrush. Adam opened his door slowly, watching Shadow's reaction. "Take your time." But Shadow surprised him. The old K-9 climbed out carefully, favoring his bad hip, and stood on the dirt driveway with his nose lifted to the wind. Something in his posture shifted. Not relaxation exactly, but a loosening of the rigid alertness he'd maintained since the auction. Here, there were no threats to assess, no perimeters to guard. Here, he could just be a dog. Adam carried the supplies inside, leaving the door open in invitation. Shadow followed after a minute, crossing the threshold with the caution of someone who'd learned that good things were often temporary. The cabin's interior was sparse but clean: a wood stove, a worn couch, a small kitchen, shelves lined with books. Everything smelled like Adam and solitude. "Food first," Adam said, filling one bowl with kibble and another with fresh water. He set them down near the kitchen, then stepped back to give Shadow space. The K-9 approached slowly, sniffed, and began to eat. Not with the desperate hunger of neglect, but with the careful efficiency of someone who'd learned to take care of himself because no one else would. Adam watched from the couch, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands. "You don't trust easy, do you? Can't say I blame you." Shadow's ear flicked toward the voice, but he kept eating. That first night set the pattern for the weeks that followed. Adam didn't force affection or expect gratitude. He simply coexisted, giving Shadow the gift of space and consistency. He kept a routine: up at dawn, coffee on the porch, chores around the property, meals at regular times, evening fires as the temperature dropped. Shadow was always invited, but never required to participate. Slowly, like ice melting in spring sunlight, something began to shift. On the third day, Shadow followed Adam to the stream. He watched as the man cast a fishing line with patient repetition, the morning light catching the water like scattered diamonds. Shadow lay on the bank, his bad hip grateful for the soft grass, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt something close to peace. On the 7th day, Shadow ate his breakfast, and then, instead of retreating to the corner he'd claimed, walked to where Adam sat reading. He didn't ask for pets or attention. He just lay down near Adam's feet, close enough to feel the warmth of another presence. Adam's hand trembled slightly as he reached down, giving Shadow time to move away. When the dog stayed still, Adam's fingers found the soft fur behind Shadow's ears, scratching gently. Shadow's eyes closed, and a sound rumbled from his chest. Not quite a growl, not quite a sigh. The sound of a creature remembering how to accept kindness. "We're gonna be okay," Adam whispered, more to himself than to Shadow. "Both of us." By the 3rd week, they developed a language without words. Adam learned that Shadow's ears going back meant strangers approaching, usually just hikers on the distant trail. Shadow learned that Adam's nightmares came in the early morning hours, and that sometimes just pressing his warm body against Adam's leg could stop the shaking. They healed each other in increments too small to measure daily, but undeniable over time. Adam started talking more, filling the silence with stories from his childhood, his time in the service, the grandfather who'd built this cabin with his own hands. Shadow would tilt his head, those intelligent eyes tracking every word, and Adam swore his dog understood more than any human ever had. Shadow started playing, cautiously at first, picking up a stick and carrying it around like he wasn't quite sure what to do with it. Then one evening, as Adam split wood, Shadow dropped the stick at his feet. Adam threw it without thinking. Shadow retrieved it, his movement stiff but determined, They played for 10 minutes, and when Shadow brought the stick back the final time, his tail was wagging. It was the first time Adam had seen that tail wag, and the sight hit him harder than he had expected. He had to turn away, blinking hard, surprised by the emotion that seized his throat. "Good boy," he managed, his voice rough. "Good boy, Shadow." The name had stuck. Adam had found it stamped on Shadow's police records, his official designation, chosen by Daniel years ago. At first, Adam had considered changing it, giving Shadow a fresh start with a new identity. But the name fit. Shadow had spent years working in the darkness, protecting others while remaining unseen, unacknowledged. Now he was stepping into the light, and his name was a reminder of everything he'd survived. 1 month became 2. The aspens turned gold, and the first snow dusted the highest peaks. Adam built Shadow a bed near the wood stove, but more often than not, the dog slept on the rug beside Adam's bed, close enough that both could be reassured by the other's breathing. They were no longer just coexisting, they were family. Adam told Shadow about his war, about the soldiers he couldn't save, about the guilt that followed him home like a shadow of its own. Shadow would rest his head on Adam's knee, and somehow that simple contact made the memories less sharp, less all-consuming. Shadow never told Adam about Daniel, but Adam understood anyway. He saw how Shadow's ears would perk at certain sounds, a police siren from the distant highway, the crunch of gravel that sounded like patrol boots. He saw the way Shadow would sometimes stare down the driveway as if waiting for someone who would never come. "He should have kept you," Adam said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. "You saved his life, and he should have found a way to keep you. That wasn't right, buddy. That wasn't fair." Shadow leaned against Adam's leg, and Adam wrapped his arm around the dog's shoulders. "But I'm grateful he didn't, because I needed you just as much as you needed me. Maybe that makes me selfish, but it's the truth." The peace they'd built was fragile, Adam knew. The world had a way of finding you, even when you tried to disappear into the mountains. But for now, in this moment, with the evening star appearing above the pines and Shadow's warmth against his side, Adam allowed himself to believe that maybe broken things could be mended. Maybe second chances were real. He had no way of knowing that their peace was about to be tested in ways neither of them could have anticipated. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday in late October. Adam had driven into town for supplies, a trip he made once every 2 weeks, time to minimize his exposure to crowds and conversation. Shadow usually came along, content to wait in the truck while Adam quickly gathered what they needed. But that morning, Shadow's hip had been bothering him more than usual, so Adam had left him home with extra food and water, promising to return before dark. "Guard the fort, buddy," Adam had said, scratching behind Shadow's ears. "I'll be back in a few hours." Shadow had watched from the porch as the truck disappeared down the winding driveway and then settled into his usual spot in the sun. The cabin felt different without Adam's presence, too quiet, too still. But Shadow had learned patience in his years of service. He would wait. What Shadow didn't know was that he wasn't alone in the forest that day. 3 men had been watching the cabin for weeks. Jake, the leader, was local, a meth addict with a string of burglaries across 2 counties and a skill for spotting isolated properties. He'd noticed Adam's predictable trips to town, timed them, understood the pattern. The cabin was remote, far from any neighbors, and Jake had seen through binoculars that the old guy lived alone with just a dog. An old, limping dog. Nothing to worry about. "He'll be gone for at least 3 hours, Jake told his companions, Marcus and Tyler, as they watched Adam's truck disappear from their vantage point on the ridge. "The place is probably full of cash. These survivalist types don't trust banks." They were wrong about the cash. Adam lived on a modest veteran's pension and had little to steal. But they were right about the timing, and by noon they'd made their way down through the forest to the cabin's perimeter. Shadow smelled them before he heard them. His nose caught the acrid scent of unwashed bodies, cigarette smoke, and something chemical that made his nostrils flare. Years of training snapped back into place like a weapon being loaded. His ears went forward, his body went rigid, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. The men were trying the back door when Shadow appeared at the window, his bark explosive in the mountain silence. "Jesus!" Tyler jumped back, his heart hammering. "You said it was an old dog!" Jake peered through the window at Shadow, who stood with his fur bristled, teeth bared, every inch the police K-9 he had once been. For a moment, Jake reconsidered, but desperation makes men stupid. And Jake needed money more than he feared an aging German shepherd. "It's just a dog," Jake said, pulling a crowbar from his backpack, "and there's 3 of us. It can't guard every door at once." They split up. Jake moving to the front, Marcus staying at the back, Tyler circling to check the windows. Shadow raced from point to point, his bad hip screaming with each rapid movement, but adrenaline overriding the pain. He barked warnings, threw himself against doors, anything to tell these intruders that this home was protected, that they needed to leave. But his body wasn't what it used to be, and there were too many entry points to cover. Jake jimmied the front door lock with practiced efficiency. The wood splintered, the door swung open, and suddenly the threat was inside. Shadow launched himself forward, all teeth and fury, a machine built for one purpose, to protect. Jake swung the crowbar. Shadow dodged, his training letting him read the attack before it came, but his hip couldn't execute the full evasion. The metal bar glanced off his shoulder, sending pain radiating through his body. Shadow stumbled, but didn't retreat. He'd taken bullets before. He'd take worse to defend what was his. Because this wasn't just a house anymore. This was home. This was Adam's sanctuary. This was the place where Shadow had learned that life could be gentle, that humans could be kind, that broken things could heal. And he would die before he let anyone take that away. Shadow lunged again, his jaws finding purchase on Jake's forearm. The man screamed, trying to shake the dog off, but Shadow's bite was surgical, precise, unbreakable, the culmination of years of training. Jake's companions rushed forward, kicking, hitting, trying to make Shadow release. The old K-9 held on even as blows rained down on his body, even as his vision started to blur, even as his bad hip finally gave out and he collapsed to the floor, still holding Jake's arm in his jaws. "Get it off! Get it off!" Jake was screaming, blood running down his arm. Marcus grabbed a lamp and brought it down hard on Shadow's head. The world exploded in white light and pain, and Shadow's jaw went slack. He crumpled to the floor, consciousness flickering like a candle in wind. Through the haze, he heard them ransacking the cabin, cursing the lack of valuables, breaking things out of frustration. Shadow tried to stand, his legs betraying him, his vision swimming. Blood ran into his eyes from a gash on his head, but even broken and beaten, even barely conscious, Shadow crawled toward them, inch by painful inch, leaving a trail of blood on the hardwood floor Adam had lovingly refinished. He would not stop. He could not stop. It wasn't in him to give up. "Jesus, it's still coming," Tyler said, his voice tinged with something that might have been respect or fear. Jake kicked Shadow hard in the ribs. "Stay down, you stupid mutt!" But Shadow didn't understand down when it came to protecting his family. He'd learned that lesson 5 years ago in a warehouse, taking a bullet for Daniel. He'd learned it again in 8 years of service, running toward danger when every instinct said to run away. Some lessons were carved too deep to ever forget. The last thing Shadow saw before darkness claimed him was Jake reaching for Adam's laptop, the one device in the cabin worth stealing. Shadow's last conscious thought
was a prayer that Adam would come home soon, that Adam would be safe, that somehow this would be okay. Then the darkness swallowed him whole.
Adam knew something was wrong the moment he turned onto his driveway. The front door was open, swinging slightly in the afternoon breeze. Adam's heart dropped into his stomach, his combat instincts screaming danger, even as his mind tried to rationalize. Maybe he left it unlocked. Maybe the wind had caught it. But Adam never left doors unlocked, and Shadow always greeted him from the porch. "Shadow?" Adam called, his voice tight with fear as he climbed out of the truck. Silence answered him, the wrong kind of silence. Adam ran to the cabin, his old injuries forgotten in the surge of adrenaline. The scene that greeted him inside made his blood turn to ice. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled open, his belongings scattered across the floor like debris after a storm. And in the center of it all, lying in a pool of his own blood, was Shadow. No, 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 no. Adam dropped to his knees beside the dog, his hands hovering over Shadow's broken body, afraid to touch, afraid of what he'd find. "Shadow, buddy, stay with me." Shadow's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with pain. But when they found Adam's face, something shifted in them. Recognition, relief, and exhaustion so profound that Adam's chest tightened. "You fought them off," Adam whispered, seeing the evidence everywhere. Blood on Shadow's muzzle, torn fabric from someone's clothes caught in his teeth, defensive wounds showing he'd never stopped fighting. "Oh God, buddy, what did they do to you?" Shadow tried to lift his head, tried to wag his tail, tried to show Adam that he'd done his job, that he'd protected their home, but his body had finally reached its limit. He'd given everything he had left, and there was nothing more to give. Adam's hands shook as he gently probed Shadow's injuries, a deep gash on his head, bruised ribs, his bad hip re-injured, and internal damage he couldn't assess without veterinary equipment. Shadow needed help now, needed medical attention beyond what Adam's combat medic training could provide in a cabin 40 miles from town. "I'm gonna get you help," Adam said, his voice breaking. "I'm gonna fix this, I promise." He grabbed a blanket, carefully wrapping Shadow in it, supporting the dog's head and injured hip as he lifted him. Shadow whimpered, the first sound of pain Adam had ever heard him make, and Adam felt something crack inside his chest. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I left you alone. I'm sorry you had to fight by yourself." Tears ran down Adam's face as he carried Shadow to the truck, and he didn't bother to wipe them away. "But you're not alone anymore, buddy. Never again. I've got you." The drive down the mountain was a blur of terror and desperation. Adam drove with one hand, the other resting on Shadow's side, feeling for the reassuring rise and fall of breath. Shadow drifted in and out of consciousness, and every time his breathing stuttered, Adam's heart stopped with it. "Stay with me," Adam pleaded, his voice raw. "Please, Shadow, please don't leave me. I need you. Do you hear me? I need you." Shadow's eyes opened one more time, finding Adam's face in the rearview mirror, and despite everything, the pain, the exhaustion, the blood, his tail moved, just once, just enough. It was the smallest gesture, barely a movement. But it meant, "I'm still here. I'm still fighting. For you."
The emergency veterinary clinic was 45 minutes away, but Adam made it in 30. He carried Shadow through the doors like a father carrying his child, his shirt soaked with blood, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. "Please," was all he managed to say. The vet on duty, Dr. Sarah Chen, took one look at Shadow and called for her team. Within minutes, Shadow was on a table under bright lights, with IV lines running into his legs and an oxygen mask over his muzzle. Adam stood back, hands clenched into fists, watching strangers try to save the only family he had left. "Sir, I need you to tell me what happened," Dr. Chen said, her hands moving with practiced efficiency over Shadow's body. Adam explained in short, clipped sentences the burglary, finding Shadow, the defensive wounds. As he spoke, Dr. Chen's expression shifted from clinical detachment to something else, something that looked like recognition. "Wait," she said, pausing to look at Shadow more closely. "The scarring pattern on his hip and the tattoo in his ear, this is a police K-9. This is Shadow, isn't it? The dog who saved that officer's life?" Adam blinked, surprised. "You know him?" "Everyone in the law enforcement community knows about Shadow," Dr. Chen said, her voice soft with respect. "My brother is a state trooper. When Shadow was shot, it was all anyone talked about. A hero dog who took a bullet and never complained, who just wanted to keep working. And then," she stopped, her jaw tightening, "and then he disappeared into the system." Adam's throat constricted. He'd known Shadow was special, had understood the dog had a history, but hearing it confirmed, hearing the reverence in Dr. Chen's voice, made him realize just how much Shadow had lost when he'd been auctioned off like surplus equipment. "Can you save him?" Adam asked, the question barely a whisper. Dr. Chen met his eyes. "He's in bad shape. Concussion, 3 cracked ribs, internal bleeding, and his old hip injury is severely aggravated. He's lost a lot of blood." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But if there's one thing I learned about canines like Shadow, they don't quit. If he wants to fight, we'll give him every chance." "He wants to fight," Adam said, with absolute certainty. "He's been fighting his whole life." The surgery took 4 hours. Adam sat in the waiting room, his head in his hands, replaying every moment of the past months. How Shadow had slowly opened up, learned to trust, found peace in their mountain sanctuary. How that peace had been shattered by 3 men looking for things that didn't exist. Adam had called the sheriff's department from the clinic. Deputies were at his cabin now, processing the scene, looking for evidence. They told him not to worry, that they'd find who did this. But Adam didn't care about justice right now. He only cared about the dog fighting for his life in the next room. When Dr. Chen finally emerged, still in her surgical scrubs, Adam was on his feet before she'd taken 2 steps. "He made it through surgery," she said, and Adam's knees nearly buckled with relief. "The internal bleeding is controlled. We've set his ribs, and we're managing the concussion. He's stable, but the next 48 hours are critical. He needs to want to pull through." "Can I see him?" Dr. Chen nodded. "He's sedated, but yes, sometimes they know when someone they love is near." Shadow lay on a padded table in the recovery room, his body wrapped in bandages, tubes and monitors tracking his vital signs. He looked small somehow, vulnerable in a way Adam had never seen. But his chest rose and fell steadily, and that rhythm was the most beautiful thing Adam had ever witnessed. Adam pulled a chair close and took Shadow's paw gently in his hand. "I'm here," Adam said, his voice thick, "and I'm not leaving. You hear me, Shadow? You don't get to give up. You fought for me. Now I'm fighting for you. We're in this together." He stayed all night, dozing in the chair, jerking awake every time a monitor beeped or Shadow's breathing changed. Dr. Chen checked in regularly, adjusting medications, monitoring progress. She never asked Adam to leave. By morning, Shadow's eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy with pain medication, but they found Adam immediately, and something that might have been a sigh escaped the dog's chest. "There you are," Adam breathed, his smile watery. "There's my brave boy." Shadow's tail gave the faintest wag, and Adam had to look away to hide the tears streaming down his face. The story of Shadow's heroic defense spread faster than anyone anticipated. Dr. Chen mentioned it to her brother, the state trooper. He told his colleagues. Someone posted about it on social media, a retired police canine discarded by the system who'd nearly died defending his new owner from burglars. The post went viral. By the time Shadow was strong enough to go home 3 days later, the clinic's waiting room was filled with flowers, cards, and toys from strangers who'd been moved by his story. Local news stations were calling, wanting interviews. The sheriff's department had identified the burglars from Shadow's bite patterns and blood evidence. All three were in custody, facing multiple felonies. But the call that changed everything came on Shadow's 4th day of recovery. Adam was sitting beside Shadow's recovery kennel, reading aloud from one of the cards, a child's drawing of a dog with a cape and the words, "You're my hero," scrawled in crayon, when Dr. Chen appeared at the door with a strange expression on her face. "Adam, there's someone here who'd like to see Shadow, if you're okay with it." Adam's protective instincts flared. "A reporter? I've told you, I don't want them bothering." "Not a reporter," Dr. Chen interrupted gently. "It's Officer Daniel Rodriguez, Shadow's former handler." The world seemed to stop spinning. Adam looked down at Shadow, who'd been dozing peacefully, and saw the dog's ears perk up at the name. His nose lifted, testing the air, and his whole body went rigid with attention. He knew. Somehow Shadow knew Daniel was near. Adam's first instinct was anger. Where had Daniel been for 3 years? Why hadn't he found a way to keep Shadow? Why had he let his partner end up in an auction, unwanted and alone? But then he saw Shadow's tail begin to wag, slowly at first, then faster, and Adam understood that whatever he felt didn't matter. This wasn't about him. "Send him in," Adam said quietly. Daniel Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, and Adam was struck by how young he looked, maybe 30, with dark hair and a patrolman's uniform that still looked crisp despite being worn all day. But it was his eyes that caught Adam's attention. They were red-rimmed and haunted, carrying the weight of guilt that Adam recognized because he'd seen it in his own mirror. "Shadow," Daniel breathed, and his voice broke on the name. Shadow's reaction was immediate and devastating. The dog tried to stand despite his injuries, whining in a way that was pure joy and desperate longing mixed together. His tail wagged so hard it shook his whole body, and he pressed himself against the kennel door, trying to reach the man who'd once been his entire world. Daniel dropped to his knees in front of the kennel, his hand shaking as Dr. Chen opened the door. Shadow crawled out, dragging his bandaged body forward, and collapsed against Daniel's chest. The officer wrapped his arms around the dog and wept. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, buddy. I'm so sorry." Adam stood back, his own eyes stinging, watching a reunion that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Shadow was licking Daniel's face, making sounds Adam had never heard, little whines and whimpers that spoke of a broken heart finally feeling whole again. "I wanted to keep you," Daniel was saying, his words tumbling out between sobs. "I fought with my wife. I looked at bigger apartments. I even considered leaving the force to find a job where I could have you. But she gave me an ultimatum, and I was a coward. I chose wrong, Shadow. I chose so wrong, and I've regretted it every single day." Daniel looked up at Adam, his face streaked with tears. "When I heard what happened, when I heard that Shadow had fought off burglars and nearly died," his voice failed him. "I had to come. I had to see him, to tell him I'm sorry, to tell him he's a hero, and he always has been, and I never should have let him go." I saw his own pain reflected in Daniel's eyes, the guilt of failing someone who depended on you, the weight of choices that couldn't be unmade, and in that moment Adam's anger dissolved into something deeper, understanding. "He saved my life too, not from bullets, from loneliness, from the kind of darkness that doesn't need weapons. He gave me a reason to wake up every morning." Daniel nodded, understanding passing between them without need for more words. Two men, both broken in different ways, both saved by the same dog. Shadow had his head pressed against Daniel's shoulder, but his eyes were on Adam, and in that gaze was a question. What happens now? Adam took a shaky breath, knowing what he had to do, even though it felt like tearing out his own heart. "If you want him back, if you've made room in your life for him now—" "No." Daniel cut him off, shaking his head. "No, I can see how he looks at you. I can see that he has a home, a real home, with someone who was there when I wasn't. I don't deserve to take him back." Daniel scratched behind Shadow's ears one more time, then gently kissed the top of his head. "But maybe, if it's okay with you, maybe I could visit sometimes? I'm still in the area, still on patrol. I could check in, make sure he's okay, make sure you both are okay." Adam felt relief wash over him so powerfully his knees went weak. "I'd like that. I think Shadow would like that too." And Shadow, wise and forgiving in a way humans could never quite manage, pressed himself between both men, his tail wagging, his eyes bright despite the pain. He had lost one family and found another, and now, impossibly, he had them both. Some wounds, it seemed, could heal after all. The town ceremony took place 6 weeks later, on a crisp December morning, when the first real snow of the season was just beginning to fall. Shadow had recovered enough to walk without limping too badly, though he'd never be the same physically. But then again, none of them would be the same. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant learning to carry the scars with grace. The mayor had insisted on recognizing Shadow's heroism. What had started as a small acknowledgement had grown into something larger when the story continued to spread. News outlets, social media, even a segment on a national morning show. People were hungry for stories about loyalty, about second chances, about heroes who didn't quit even when the world had quit on them. Adam had resisted at first. The attention felt wrong, invasive, too much like the crowds and noise they'd escaped to the mountains. But Dr. Chen had said something that changed his mind. Shadow spent years protecting others and received nothing but abandonment. Let him have this. Let the world see what he's worth. So Adam had agreed on the condition that it remained small and respectful. No circus, no exploitation, just recognition. The ceremony was held in the town square where a modest crowd had gathered despite the cold. Veterans in uniforms stood at attention. Local law enforcement officers, including Daniel, formed an honor guard. Children held signs with Shadow's name. News cameras captured everything from a respectful distance. Shadow sat beside Adam on the makeshift stage. His K-9 vest, the one Daniel had saved from his service days, fitted over his bandages. He looked dignified despite his injuries, his dark eyes alert and intelligent as they surveyed the crowd. Adam kept one hand on Shadow's shoulders, a steady presence. The mayor spoke about courage and service, about how heroism wasn't measured in years of strength, but in moments of choice. The sheriff presented the evidence that Shadow's actions had led to the arrest and conviction of the burglars, who were now serving significant prison time. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady but emotional, as he told Shadow's story, from puppy training to that warehouse shooting, from forced retirement to finding Adam to his final act of protection. "Shadow taught me that love isn't about convenience," he said, his eyes finding Shadow's. "It's about showing up even when it's hard. And while I failed him in that lesson, someone else didn't." He turned to Adam. "Thank you for giving him the life he deserved, the life I should have fought harder to give him." Adam nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Then came the presentation, a Medal of Valor from the police department, a commendation from the mayor's office, and something that made Adam's breath catch, a lifetime of free veterinary care from Dr. Chen's clinic, funded by donations that had poured in from around the country. People wanted to help, Dr. Chen explained as she handed Adam the certificate. They wanted Shadow to know he matters, that his service mattered, that he's seen and valued. As the crowd applauded, Shadow did something unexpected. He stood, favoring his good hip, and walked to the edge of the stage. He looked out at all the faces, the children with their signs, the veterans saluting, the officers standing at attention, the strangers who'd driven hours just to see him. His tail began to wag, slowly at first, then with genuine joy. For so long, Shadow had been invisible, a number, a tool, a discarded piece of equipment. But now, in this moment, he was finally seen, not just as a police dog or a hero, but as a living being worthy of love and recognition. Adam joined Shadow at the edge of the stage, kneeling beside him. "You okay, buddy?" he whispered. Shadow leaned into him, and Adam felt the familiar warmth that had become his anchor in the world. Together they faced the applause, two souls who'd found each other in their darkest moments and discovered that redemption was always possible. Spring came to the mountains like a promise kept. The snow melted, revealing new growth underneath. Wildflowers pushed through the earth, determined and beautiful. The stream ran high with runoff, its music filling the valley. Adam and Shadow sat on the porch, watching the world wake up. Shadow's injuries had healed as much as they were going to. He'd always have a limp, would always carry the physical reminders of that day. But he moved with contentment now, no longer fighting his body's limitations, but accepting them as part of his story. Daniel visited every few weeks, always bringing treats and updates from the department. He and Adam had become friends, bonded by their shared love for the dog who'd saved them both in different ways. Shadow would greet Daniel with joy, but no longer the desperate longing of before. He knew now that love didn't require choosing, that hearts could hold multiple people without diminishing any of them. The cabin had become something of a pilgrimage site for people who'd heard Shadow's story. Adam had installed a mailbox at the end of the driveway where people left letters, drawings, and small gifts. Children wrote about how Shadow inspired them to be brave. Veterans wrote about finding hope in his resilience. Abuse survivors wrote about his story helping them leave situations where they'd felt trapped. Adam read the letters to Shadow on quiet evenings, and though he knew the dog didn't understand the words, he felt Shadow understood the sentiment. You matter. Your life has meaning. Your courage echoes beyond yourself. One afternoon, as Adam worked in the garden and Shadow dozed nearby, a young woman arrived at the cabin. She was nervous, clutching a folder to her chest. "I'm sorry to intrude. My name's Rachel. I work with a K-9 retirement program. We place police dogs with their handlers or find them loving homes." She paused. "Shadow's story changed everything for us. Donations have increased tenfold. We've been able to ensure that no K-9 in our state will ever end up at auction again. They'll all go to screened, loving homes." Adam stood slowly, dirt on his hands, hope in his chest. "Because of Shadow?" "Because of Shadow," Rachel confirmed. "He became the face of a cause people didn't know needed attention. Retired canines who served faithfully and deserved better. His story made people care." She opened her folder and showed Adam photos. Dogs with their new families, handlers who'd found ways to keep their partners, foster programs that bridged the gap, dozens of dogs whose lives were different because Shadow's story had been told. "I wanted you to know," Rachel said softly. "What happened to him was wrong. But what came after, the love you gave him, the courage he showed, the awareness it raised, it's saving lives, real, tangible lives." After she left, Adam sat beside Shadow and told him everything. Shadow's tail wagged slowly, and he rested his head on Adam's knee. Neither of them spoke. They'd never needed words to communicate the things that mattered. Shadow was a police dog, a partner, a cast-off, a fighter, a survivor. And in the end, he was simply this: loved, completely, unconditionally, forever loved. And in the quiet of the mountain cabin, with Adam's hand resting gently on his head and the fire crackling softly in the hearth, Shadow's tail wagged one more time, because he knew he was home, and he knew that home would never abandon him again.